Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and today we are back working on the L28 for my Datsun 240Z. Okay guys, as I said, we're back working on the engine today on the Z. Now, as those of you who follow my Beetle videos as well, you may have seen I've actually come up with the name John Lemon for the Beetle. It's got multiple layers of meanings there. It's the car was originally yellow, although as of the other day I just painted the shell so it's no longer yellow. But it's more, it goes back to obviously the band, the Beatles, and also the fact it's also a lemon because it's left us stranded a couple of times. So in any case, that was quite a nice fitting name for the Beetle, John Lemon. We're still after names for the Z. Need suggestions, bring them on. But in any case, we're getting back onto building the engine, and one of the first things I had to go through and do, after last week you saw me, I cleaned up these pistons, and I had to make sure that they were within spec, and that also the block was in spec. So what I did first is I had to go through all of the pistons and measure them, because basically, obviously they're sliding up and down all the time, and they do wear, and the sleeves of the block wear, and generally they wear more at the top than the bottom, so they get a taper. And also, obviously the sides of the pistons can wear as well, and if there's too big a gap between the cylinder wall and the piston, you can get piston slap, and basically then you've got to re-sleeve the block or bore it out and get bigger pistons. And I really didn't want to do that, and thankfully these are within spec, but I'll go through now and show you exactly how I measured them and how we found that they were in spec. When the piston goes up and down in the cylinder, it doesn't really rock side to side too much. It rocks this way, and it can wear out these sides. So this is more of the area where you need to measure the size of the piston. So you measure across with the outside micrometer, across level with the gudgeon pin, and there's your measurement. I've already gone through and measured all of the pistons and got all of my measurements here, and they're all very close to each other. They're all within 0.03 of a millimeter, which is very tight. So that's the first step. So I measured the pistons, and I also measured across the skirts just to see, which right down the bottom, just to also see, due to that movement, to see how much variation there is. And there's very little variation. It's actually quite good. So the next thing I needed to do was go through and measure the bores on my block, and I'll take you through, show you that now. When I took the engine in to just get chemically clean, I got the engine honed. It's not a difficult process. It's something you can do yourself and get in there. There's still some markings here, but it's actually not too bad, and there's nothing that actually catches a nail or anything. It's actually very good. And I was worried it was actually, because of these marks, I thought it had quite a bit of taper. The way to check for taper is you need to measure both along with the crank, which obviously doesn't wear a lot, again, because the pistons move this way rather than this way. And what we use for that is we use these spring-loaded telescopic gauges. So you sit these inside the block at multiple different heights, pull it back out, and then with your outside micrometer, you measure across these. And I've already done this at 3 different heights going down both directions on each of these cylinders, and I recorded all my measurements here. So I've taken all of those measurements and taken the worst measurements and then gone piston to bore clearance, and what I've come up with across the range is actually quite an even piston to bore clearance. So basically the factory spec when it's new is 0.05 of a millimeter, and the maximum allowable is 0.22 of a millimeter. So we're still well within spec, so that's quite good. And the taper, the worst of the taper is almost non-existent. The worst of the taper, I think, was about, where have we? 0.05 is the worst taper, which is on cylinder 3. That has the worst taper, 0.05 of a millimeter, and it needs to be less than 0.1. So we're well within spec. I'm quite happy with the measurements of the block and measurements of the cylinders. So now we have to go through and have a look at balancing these pistons. Okay, that brings me up to balancing these pistons, and I started doing it a little bit last week, just trying to weigh them with Mrs. Jeff's kitchen scales, and they only go down to 1 gram, which is not accurate enough. So I jumped on eBay, and it actually came in a couple of days, and I got this basic set of scales here, and this goes down to 0.1 of a gram. So it's much more accurate to try and measure the weights of all these pistons. Now, one of the issues I have is, and was brought up in some of the comments, is normally to balance the pistons and the rods and everything, you should balance them all separately. The issue I have is with the Datsun pistons and rods, etc., is a lot of cars have a circlip holding the gudgeon pin in, so you can just undo the circlip, slide the gudgeon pin out, disconnect the rod, and you can measure everything separately, and it wouldn't be too difficult. The issue with these is on the L28, there's no circlips. The gudgeon pin is actually pressed, and usually you heat up the rod and then just slip the pin into the rod, and it's actually a press fit. And to get it out, you have to press it out, and to press it out, you are very likely to damage a piston. It's very easy to damage these really light aluminium pistons, and I'm reusing it all. And even the engine builder said the same thing. Is it's not worth pushing them out if you're going to reuse them, because you're quite likely to damage them and then have to replace them. And I don't want to have to do that. So what I'm going to do now is at least the best I can is go through, and I'm going to weigh all of my rod bolts and weigh all of my rings, so then I can at least have a little bit of flexibility. If there's a little bit of difference, there probably is very little, I can put the lightest bits with the heaviest bits to try and balance things out, and that's the best way to do it if you could separate everything. But I'm going to go with what I've got, and yeah, let's start weighing things and see how we go. Okay, so I went through again and I measured accurately all the pistons and rods, and then I measured all of the groups of the rings and the pairs of the bolts. And there was very slight discrepancies, but there were discrepancies, which is good. And that will help me balance things out before I actually have to take materials off. So what I wanted to do was add the heaviest rings and heaviest bolts to the lightest piston, and the lightest rings and lightest bolts to the heaviest piston. So this is where it can get really confusing and really quickly, and this is where I actually, it ultimately led to me breaking the ring in my 911, is because I had ring set 1 with piston 3 in cylinder 4, and it starts getting really confusing really quickly. And what I did is I thought, well, let's keep away from numbers. We've already got numbered 1 through 6. So I went and I went through all my weights, and next to each one I did the rings and the bolts. I marked the lightest set of rings as A, and then the heaviest through to F. So A, B, C, D, E, F, and ranged them that way. Same with the bolts. And then the pistons I did in the reverse order. So I measured I set A as the heaviest piston and F as the lightest piston, and then all I had to do is go through and go, okay, well, just basically put all the A's together, the B's, the C's, the D's, and got them all, so I don't have to mess it up. So now I'm going to go back through and weigh the whole lot as one, and that will give me my final weights before balancing, and then I can work out exactly how much I need to take off of each set to get them down to the weights I want and get them all even. right, just discovered something very interesting, that basically the weight difference over the whole setup between the heaviest and the lightest piston is 3 grams. But just in these end caps, the weight difference between the heaviest and the lightest is 5.5 grams. So a lot of the weight is in these end caps. And of course, this is where balancing the rods, etc., separately first would be good. So then you get the rods all even weights and then work along and get the pistons all even weights. I don't have that luxury. I'm just going to get them overall that, I mean, they were running in the engine fine. This is how they come from the factory. It's not as good as balancing them all perfectly and properly like I have done in my 911. But for these, I'm going to get them as good as I can without pulling apart. So it's time to start taking some size off of these end caps and then start sort of balancing things out and see if I can get them all weighing the same. All right, so I've gone through and these 4 pistons, rods and everything are all balanced nicely. They all balanced within 0.1 of a gram. Most of them are all exactly the same weight. And I took all these weights off of the end cap because they were heavier, but these 2 on the ends, these end caps are actually quite light already. So I need to take the weight off of the other end, which means I'm going to go in, I'm going to try and take it off of the edge of the rod up near the rotating assembly up the top. So let's get into that now. Okay, so as always, that took much longer than I expected, but now they're all balanced and they're all within 0.1 of a gram, so they're all quite nicely balanced. So that means now it's time to head over and finish cleaning up the block so we can start reassembling that. All right, so we're almost done with cleaning this block up. I spent a lot of time doing it before, but I didn't actually finish it. What I need to do to finish the job off is actually I need to remove these plugs. Either end there's an oil gallery through here, and there's a plug pressed into the end here. I need to drill that out, tap it, and then pull it out so that I can actually get in there and clean this on both ends of the block, which means take it off the engine stand and pull them out. But let's do this one while it's on here. Alright, so this has all been, the oil plugs are punched out and cleaned up. I've got some new plugs, so I'm just going to tap them in either end and then I can put it back on the engine stand. Okay, that was a reasonably productive day. I got everything balanced, which was quite time consuming, but definitely worthwhile. And all the Welsh plugs are in now. The block is all clean. It's all ready to go. So next week, it is just a matter of starting to reassemble the engine, which is going to be great. I've been so looking forward to actually doing this. So yeah, fingers crossed. Hopefully next week we can start putting the bottom end in. In any case, that is all I have time for this week, so that must mean it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, 1965 saw the first Bathurst special vehicle from a manufacturer in the Ford Cortina GT 500. These cars were Australia's answer to the Lotus Cortina with performance and suspension upgrades. And it was still technically a production car, and there were around 250 made. They came in first and second place with the Mini Cooper S coming in third. 1966 saw the Cooper S completely dominate the race, taking out the first 9 places. And interestingly, this was the last outright victory of a 4-cylinder for over 2 decades. The Nissan factory-backed Datsun 1300 took out Class A that same year.
Okay, we're getting there on this engine. I've finally got it sort of buttoned up so I can actually hopefully start bolting things together and get it going. It really seems like I'm finally making progress on the Beetle, on the Datsun. Like they're really sort of getting to stages where I've stopped pulling them apart and actually started putting them together. You know, primers on the cars, it's actually getting closer. It's great, finally.
Anyway, if you want to help the channel out, we've got some cool merchandise here.
Links in the description. Head down to our store.
And as always, please like, subscribe, and we'll see you in a few days. Bye, guys.
See you guys.
And fuel upgrades. That's not right. Cars were Australia's artist. Australia's artist. Cars were Australia's artist too.
Where's the artist coming from?
Cars were Australia's answer. I don't know.